stood right on the top of the liver building. As you can see, there's the other liver bird. There's one right above me here. Let's hope they don't come alive and fly off, because otherwise I'm in deep trouble, as are we all, of course, because of the myth. So why am I here? Well, I thought I'd talk to you about certainty of objects today, and of course the case of Mcphail and Doulton. I'll give my full exposition downstairs in the boardroom, but I thought I'd come up with perhaps a hypothetical case and a hypothetical discretionary trust where the potential objects were are the residents of Merseyside. And I thought I'd use that to illustrate perhaps uncertainty. Because, of course, how would a trustee or perhaps a court cause a resident of Merseyside to be defined? So let's have a little walk around the tower and point out potential areas where objects might live. So behind me you can see right in the far distance the new Anfield Stadium being built. Would the boundary of Merseyside stretch that far to Everton and over to Anfield? You can see city towers stretching out towards the cathedral. There's the Metropolitan Cathedral, of course, right next to the university. So then from the Metropolitan Cathedral, if you come this way, if you accompany me along these precarious heights of the liver building, you'll see behind me the Anglican Cathedral at the other end of Hope Street, and then the city stretching out before us. There's Lime Street on this beautiful sunny August afternoon. Come with me this way and you'll see the Albert Dock. So let's go and have a look. All the time think in your minds, would a resident of Liverpool fall within that definition of this discretionary trust that we're trying to create, this fictitious trust? Now then before me we see South Liverpool, Dingle, part of South Liverpool, and then in the foreground here the Albert Dock you can see stretching out in a beautiful vista going up the Mersey far up to the source. Beautiful. Is this, or are people who are along the shoreline of the Mersey residents of Merseyside? How far up towards the source would that trust be valid for? Follow me again, let's go over here. Another magnificent shot here of the Mersey stretching out before us. So over this side, of course, we see the Wirral. Some of the industrial elements of the Wirral over there. In the foreground, of course, you've got the Museum of Liverpool. The Cunard building is just below us here. Customs House just beyond it. And then, of course, the Albert Dock, the Echo Arena, and so on. Follow me again as we come to the final corner of the top of this tower on the liver building. And here you'll see stretching out before me is, of course, the Wirral, Birkenhead, famous in our discipline, of course, for F.E. Smith, the Earl of Birkenhead, and his descendants. So, would people who live on that side of the Mersey classify as potential objects within our fictitious trust for the benefit of objects who would be defined as residents of Merseyside? Is that class of objects administratively unworkable for the trustees? Would both the trustees and the court have problems enforcing that trust? We'll discuss this in the boardroom down below, but for now, from the top of the liver building, I bid you goodbye. Goodbye. Well, here I am in the boardroom of the liver building. You caught me there neglecting my work here as chairman for the day of the Royal Liver Assurance Company, sitting here. Actually, I was admiring the view of the Wirral, which you can see out of the window here. It's a beautiful view. We saw it moments ago when we were up on the roof having a look at Liverpool. And that's important because, of course, what we're looking at today, what we're trying to test, is certainty of objects and various elements of what an object might be and how we might determine if that object is certain or not through the eyes of the trustees or the court. And it's important when we've got this kinds of trusts that we're thinking about, discretionary trusts, because, of course, for them to be enforceable, they must be certain. And the case we'll look at, as I suggested on the roof, to demonstrate these points and ideas, is Mcphail and Doulton, which, as you know, is a 1971 House of Lords decision. So it's 1971 appeal cases at page 424. The facts are very interesting, not least we're in a commercial setting here, and the potential objects in that case were employees. And I'll just briefly read to you the disposition that was made to show you what the testator was trying to do with this will, with this discretionary trust. And it was this. So the testator, Bertram Baden, tried to establish, quote, establish a fund for providing benefits for the staff of the company, and the company was Matthew Hall & Co. Limited, and this is critical, and their relatives and dependents. And it goes on. In making the trustees' absolute discretion, grants to or for the benefit of any of the officers and employees or ex-officers or ex-employees of the company, or to any relatives or dependents of any such persons. So in that discretionary trust then, we've got current employees, ex-employees, dependents, relatives. So the question for us to consider is to what extent those four different types of object, those beneficiaries, can be sufficiently certainly ascertained, or ascertained with sufficient certainty, I should say, if I'm going to use English properly. So we might have a problem, and we can approach this case usually, if it was a fixed trust like we saw in IRC and Broadway Cottages, where we'd have to draw up a complete list of every potential object. So we'd have to know every single employee of Matthew Hall & Co. Or if it was the Liver company, the Liver Assurance Group, it would have to be every employee on that list. And then we'd have sufficient certainty. But we saw that IRC, and indeed in Mcphail, IRC and Broadway Cottages, critiqued for being unduly rigorous in the sense of certainty. So in this discretionary trust, not a fixed trust like we saw in that case, but in this discretionary trust, we see that certain problems might arise when we're trying to ascertain who those objects might be. Or in our fictitious trust, where we were looking at the residents of Merseyside that I mentioned when I was on the roof of this beautiful building, how can we determine with sufficient certainty who those residents are? So let's break that down, these issues here, down into four separate heads. And the first head is, of course, conceptual certainty. And we'll just take dependents or relatives as the term of art here as a potential object. Is it conceptually certain, or can we say with sufficient certainty, conceptually, what, or whom, I should say, a relative is? Does that include stepchildren? Does that include illegitimate children or offspring? How far does that go conceptually? That's the first problem we might have, potentially. The second area, which is problematic, is evidential uncertainty. Let's say somebody worked for the Royal Liver Assurance Group 45 years ago. We can ascertain what an employee is, that's fairly obvious. But how can we demonstrate evidentially that Mr. Smith, let's say, was an employee of this company 45 years ago? Why is that a problem? Well, perhaps the Liver company, the insurance group, or Matthew Hall & Co. Limited didn't keep particularly good records. So those records have been lost. We can't evidence then, therefore, that that person is a potential object of this discretionary trust. That's the second area of conceptual potential problems. The third, the penultimate, is, of course, ascertainability. Let's say the trust, the discretionary trust in terms of the terms, relate to three brothers. Adam, Roger and Ben. It's fine, we might think, we can ascertain they're obviously a relative, they're brothers, and we can say that it's easy to ascertain who they are, but in terms of ascertainability in the sense of how we cause that individual, Ben, let's say, of those three brothers, to participate, who's emigrated from Peerhead to America or New Zealand or something, how are we going to be able to get and ascertain whether or not he's even still alive? He's gone to New Zealand, we don't know. As trustees or then the court, how can we find this out? It gives rise to uncertainty. And the final head that we want to talk about under this case is, of course, administrative unworkability. And this is absolutely key for our fictitious Merseyside case, unlike Mcphail and Doulton, where, of course, it's employees, dependents, relatives, etc. But if it's the residents of Merseyside, administratively, in terms of how a trustee goes about their job to make distributions or even ascertain who those residents are, is that class of objects so broad as to make this trust administratively unworkable? And of course, there have been very few, if in fact no, reported decisions on this limb of the conceptual parts of the tests we're exploring. But there have been over to comments. So, for example, all residents of London was seen perhaps to be void for the reasons we're discussing, in a similar way that perhaps all the residents of Merseyside might also be too uncertain for those trustees to be able to work through in terms of this distribution. So, in summary, Mcphail and Doulton is quite a complex case. I haven't even touched on Mr. Justice Goff, as he then was, decision at first instance, and the power trust differences that exist. We'll explore that in a different video. I haven't descended into the facts particularly deeply, save to bring up some names of relatives, dependents, etc. I've given you some ideas around the given postulant test and conceptual, evidential uncertainty, etc. And I just summarise by saying, of course, what we might say with this case is it's moved us away and on from the fixed trust list sense of IRC and Broadway cottages and that test, taken us in a discretionary trust sense to a given postulant test, whether or not someone conceptually and evidentially fit within a class of objects to then become this beneficiary or an object of this trust. So have a look at the case and the other videos that talk to its sister cases, Rebaden number 2, the subsequent case in this long-running series, Gulbenkian, IRC and Broadway cottages, etc. And think about this judgment quite carefully. So, from here in the boardroom of the, what sits now in the Liver building, I bid you a good afternoon, and I will continue gazing over the Wirral. On that point, I say goodbye.